Sound's off. Let's try again. That was on my end. Apologies for that. Cool. Welcome, everyone. I'll start again. So last week we had a look at Raspberry Pis in our first hacked preparation session. We looked at using a sensor. We looked at gathering information from those sensors, putting it in a database, and then making a website out of it, which is really, really exciting. This week, we are going to be looking at APIs, which is Application Programming Interface. It's really exciting. You may have used APIs without realizing before. In fact, I promise you that you have used APIs without realizing, but we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into what an API is. So before we look at anything, just going to do a little diagram, something you've used a lot. So you are using a browser right now to watch me. We're going to call that a client. That is a term we use in tech to describe something that can make requests on the internet. And it's making a request to a server. So every time you visit a website, client is saying, hey, server, can I have the website, please? And then the server says, yeah, here you go. Here's the website. When you opened YouTube to watch this stream, your client, Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari, made a request to a server, say, can I please have YouTube? And the YouTube says, here you go. It returns three things, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, a whole bunch of stuff. An API is very, very similar. The only real difference is instead of returning a website with information about what to display on the screen, it just returns different information, usually in the form of something called JSON, which is a JavaScript object notation. But sometimes it returns an image or just a link to an image. And we're going to have a look at some examples of that now. So here I have a really, really basic example of an API. It's one of my favorites. It returns this. Let me zoom in on that. This is an object, a JavaScript object, or JSON object even, with two things, whether or not it was a successful request and an image of a dog. Shall we open it? Nice, a random dog. If we refresh the page, we get a different random dog. Not the most useful API to ever exist, but a perfect example of what an API is. You make a request from the client and say, hey, can I have some information, please? And then the server goes, yes, here's a picture of a dog. And you say, woohoo, a dog. That's APIs. What we're going to have a look at now is how can you use an API which has a whole bunch of public information, like, well, I'm not going to give away, and take that information and use it in a project, use it in a hackathon. So this is a basic example. I'm going to show you some more APIs and hope that's going to start to inspire you. You can start to think about other things that you can use an API for. And then I'm going to show you a demo. So here is another one. This is information from SpaceX about their launches. If you don't understand what it means, that's fine. Generally, there's usually things called documentation where you can go and find out, like, what information are you getting here? And this is like an ID for a crew member and their role. So you can see that there's going to be a mission and there's 4 people in the crew. Pretty cool. That's from SpaceX. Here we have a website that is dedicated to giving you weather. Usually when you see the word open, that means open source, free, like crowdsourced information. So it's kind of like open to everybody. And so here's the website, and they have an API that can return weather data in this format. This one's not free, unfortunately, but there are some not free without getting a key. Here we've got one about money. If you're like, oh, I really want to make a cool app to do with the stock market, Polygon.io, and an example of it being used. This is the sort of thing it would return. If you're into finance, that might mean something to you. It don't mean anything to me. Here we've got a news API, which returns news from all over the world. So here's some news that the Cybertruck sales underwhelmed in the first year, and this person ended up buying a Model 3. So I guess it's news, but who knows? Got any geocachers here? People who like geocaching? If you don't know, I recommend getting into it. It's super fun, but they have an API, so developers can make things to do with geocaches that exist all over the place. Here we have an API that's all about getting information from governments and NGOs, which is really, really cool, and gets like a whole bunch of different information about projects that they're working on. Here's a cool one. Where is the International Space Station right now? Again, this is just a website, but it's using an API that you could call and say, give me that information, and I'll display it on my own website, however I want to do it. And then last one, here is a cool API. Again, this is their front end. This is the way you can look at it and read about it. And here's an example use of this weather forecast API. And this chart here is driven by this API call. This huge API call, loads of different bits of information, like data points of time and temperature. And here's an example of how you could use it. Temperature, relative humidity, and dew point. Pretty cool. So all of these things are just examples of APIs. And one of the cool things we're going to have a look at is the NASA API. So you need to generate a key for this. Now, a key is kind of like, what's the password? When you make your request, you say, hey, server, can I have information from NASA's API? And the server goes, yeah, but are you allowed? Are you allowed to have this information? And the key is just your password to say, yes, I'm allowed. Now, the NASA API is free, but you do need a key so they can limit how much you're using it. So just like spam their servers and just overwhelm them. And it's so you just give in your name and your email, and they'll email you a key. And I've got one, and I've got a fresh one, because while I was building the demo, I reached my limit, because if you can see here, we have either 30 requests from the same place per hour or 50 per day. Well, I reached that, and I started getting an error message every time I tried to use the app that we're going to show. So you can see a whole bunch of stuff. And then down here is the API. Now, before we get into code, before we start looking at what's going on with the APIs, we're going to have a quick look at some of the examples that you can use to make API stuff, to make projects with APIs, excuse me. So, for example, NASA have one for astronomy picture of the day. This is cool. So this is apparently one of NASA's most popular websites, APIs. So here, if we just visit this URL, it's giving us the URL to call. Remember, an API is just like a website, but it doesn't return website, it returns data. So if we go here and open this up, API key missing. So when you use an API, you need to give it information. And the way we do that is in the URL. So general rule of thumb is at the end of, oh, spoilers. At the end of your URL, you'll put a question mark to say, I'm going to write something. And we're going to write API underscore key equals, and we're not going to use that one because that one's run out. We're going to use it. And that is me saying, hey, NASA, this is my password. Can I please have information? And then we get this. Again, it's just data that we can then do something with a website. I'm going to show you, I promise. So here we've got massive stars in our Milky Way. I'm not going to read that all out, but here we have a URL. If I open this image, there is NASA's picture of the day. And that is incredible. I don't know if anyone's been out this week, but looking at the planets and the alignment and seeing Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, and Mars, I think those are the 4 planets, and maybe a comet or two. I think I saw a comet last night. I'm not sure. It might just been a really bright star. So here we have some examples of an API. You can go and get information and upload URL to an image. Another one I think is really, really cool is the Epic Earth Polychromatic Imaging Camera. Gives a whole bunch of information, but you can get pictures of the Earth. And so some examples here are this one. If we open this. Right here, actually. Oh, no. We've gone over the rate limit. But we haven't, because that was from earlier, and I've got more use now. So here, a whole bunch of information. This image was taken by NASA's Epic onboard camera, the NOAA Discover spacecraft, and there's a whole bunch of information about this image, when it was taken, the coordinates, and here we have the image ID. And if I go to, if I just open this copy image address. So this is what it wants to take us to, but this ID can change. And if I change the ID for this one, we can go and get a different image of the Earth. And it looks the same, and that is because it's the same planet, just from a different angle. That's cool. We get different images of the Earth. I love it. Those are cool things you can do with this. Let's have a look. What else can we look at? Insight is a really cool one. This is a API for getting information about the weather on Mars. Now, can that help you in your day-to-day? Unlikely. Is it really cool? Yes. So you can get loads of different information, and it looks something like this. Right? Now we know what the weather's like on Mars. So it's worth remembering APIs are only as good as the data they give you. But this one is really cool. You just have to understand how to use it. Again, you look at the documentation and there's links all over this website about how to read the information. And you only want 2 or 3 bits. You don't need the whole thing. And again, I'm going to show you an example of using that in a web. And then there's one more I quite like the look of. This one is to do with how near Earth objects like asteroids, and just gives you some information about where they are, when they're going to be there. Pretty cool. So here are a bunch of examples, all to do with space, and that's because these are NASA's APIs. There is a GitHub repository, and I'm gonna send this out to anyone who signed up. I'll send this out soon, and it's a link, and it's just a list of hundreds and hundreds of different free APIs that you can use, and you can use those to inspire you. Oh, I think this could be helpful. I would to do a project around this, and so there's loads and loads of things. It's much easier to decide what API you're going to use when you know what your project you want to do is. But sometimes it can come the other way around. Oh, there's an API that gives me this information about footfall traffic in this area, and that might inspire you for the project. But it can happen the other way around as well. I want to do this project. Is there an API that can give me that information, that public data set? Remember, one of the hardest things about building a project that's very big and there's a lot of data analysis is actually getting the data. And so using an API to get the data that somebody else has already done all the work is so helpful. So last week we looked at getting the data ourselves with a Raspberry Pi. If we could combine that with something else, then an API would really good thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a really basic demo, and we're going to build something that looks like this, where you put in some latitude, longitude, and a minimum a date, but it will go and find the latest one, and the dimensions that you want to see from, and it will go and load an image from an API. And this is using the Earth API. So Landsat imagery is essentially a satellite taking pictures of the light that reflects off of the land. It's not necessarily image, well, it is images, obviously. So here's an example, and then you can see here in the docs, in the documentation, oh, here are some things we can change. We can change latitude, longitude, the width and height of the degrees, the date. This one doesn't work, but it's pretty cool. And at some point, they're going to make it so you can kind of show how much cloud cover there is, and then you need to give it an API key. So what I'm going to do is I've got a blank project in code. I'm going to walk through real basic parts of it, and we're going to use an API from NASA. It doesn't have to be NASA when you use it, but they're fun examples. Here we have a really basic app, just to show you, if you haven't done web development before, just to remind you, it's okay, because on every team will be people with a huge mix of abilities. And so someone, or at least one person on your team, will be very familiar with this sort of thing. So here we have our HTML. This is the part of the website that we see. And in the background, we're going to be running some JavaScript. And this JavaScript is going to do one thing. It's going to run this function that calls an API, and we've called it call API. So the first thing we need to do is call the API. But the answer is we need to fetch information. And so I'm going to make a new variable. Again, I'm not going to go over too much about the actual code that we're doing, just the fact that you can use JavaScript in a website to go and get information from somewhere else. Response equals, we're going to wait for the response, and we're going to say fetch. Now, what in here, we put our API. So before we use NASA, I'm going to find that dog API, which I've just closed. Give me one sec. This one that returns a random dog, and we're going to put that in here. We need to make the data in format we can read it. And so we're going to say const data equals await response.json. All of this is going to be in a place where you can see it, which again, I'll send it out in emails and you can read it, and there'll be comments all over it explaining every single line of code. But really, really important to everyone who's coming to Hack to remember, you don't need to know everything that your team is doing. You just need to know that someone else will be able to help you. So what we're going to do is we're just going to read the data on our website. So we're going to read data. Let's see what it looks like. Let's go live. See what happens on this page. Open up the console. Can we see the information? Here it is. This information here is this information. We have got an API which we could previously just call using the browser, but now instead we're using JavaScript to call that API to say, hey, give me some information because I want to do something with it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, we're going to do a different example. We're going to use one of the NASA ones. We're going to use the Earth one, which is here. So instead, I'm going to copy this, replace the random dog image, which is really cool, and I'm sorry to say goodbye to it. And we're just going to just paste this here. In fact, no, I'm not finished with the dog one. I finished with mine because I think it's really fun. We are going to do one more thing with the dog one. I wasn't planning on doing this, but I think it's fun. Put that dog image on the page. Okay. So again, bear with me. If you don't know web development, it is okay. I'll say it one more time. I'll say it a billion times next week as well. You don't need to know everything that we're doing in each project. You just need to know the parts that you know and come up with ideas and just support. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use JavaScript to put some information on the page. So I'm going to make an image with an ID on my page. I'm going to call it dog. And then I'm going to say dog dot. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Dog dot source equals data dot message. Is it message that we want to get? Yes, the message. And hopefully, when we look at the page, we will get a random picture of a dog. And when I refresh the page, we get a different random picture of a dog. We have used information that we didn't write, and this is the really exciting part. We didn't do anything. I didn't have to go and take pictures of hundreds of dogs. I didn't have to try and find the URLs for a bunch of pictures of dogs. I had one thing, which was this URL, and that gives me access to loads of information. In this case, the loads of information is pictures of dogs, but it's important that we look at lots of pictures of dogs on a regular basis. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at a project I've already made, this one. Have a look at different Landsat, and this is the aerial view of right here. So if you look really closely in the middle, just kidding. So let's have a look at that. So I'm going to walk through it as if you understand a little bit, just infer from context if there's parts that you don't understand yet. We're doing a bit of DOM manipulation to go and get parts of my page. So here we have a form, we have a container with an image inside it, there's some text. We've got my API key that we're going to use, and we've got all the different variables that change what this API will return. And now this is the important part. This is the sort of thing you'll be doing with your API if you use an API in your project. You'll need to know what are the parameters that make my API work. In my case, it's latitude, longitude, date, and dimension. I'm assuming that's dimension. And those are the 4 things we need to change. And what we've done is we've just done a little thing. Whenever you submit the form, it just changes the values of those variables based on what we've typed in the form. It goes and gets data. And here, get data function that we've got written, it does the same thing we did with the dog. It makes a fetch request. I just got that joke. The fetching the dog. Well, the dog, that wasn't intentional. we're going to request our API. We've got our API key, the latitude, the longitude, the date, and in. And then we can say, cool, go get the response and put it in the image. And then we end up with this. So I press go, and we get that. I changed the values here. We'll get a different image. It's loading. It is working. It just takes a long time. Huge image. He says. Cool. That's very similar to the one we saw a minute ago. Let's change this value. I broke it. Come on, don't break. Excellent. Nice. Satellite imagery be weird and it's missing a chunk. That's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause here and just see if there's any questions in the chat. If there's any questions in the chat, I will answer. I realize there's a delay, so if you've already asked it, I do apologize. No questions? That's all good? I'm just going to pause for a second because I do not want to miss any questions if you have any. Great. Cool. So just to recap, whenever you want information, you can make that information yourself, like we did last week with this weird little thing. And we're like, oh, give me some information. I'm going to stick it in a database and make a cool website with it. But you can also get information that other people have done all the work for. And it's so important to remember, you don't reinvent the wheel. Quite often when I'm working on a project, the thing I'll think is, oh, I really wish I did all of this myself. But I'm just reinventing the wheel. If someone has done something that makes my life easier, I should probably use it. And that's what APIs are so good for. If there's information I need about Landsat imagery, I don't have that, but NASA does. If there's pictures of dogs I need, I don't have that, but they have that at the dog.ceo API. If one of the things that we say is banned on our bootcamp is building Pokédexes, like a Pokemon library, because there's an API that's very, very good for Pokemon. But the problem is that API is amazing, and it's a really good starter project that loads and loads of blogs and YouTube channels suggest making a Pokédex. So we've banned it at Tech Educators because everybody has a Pokédex. And if you do make one, that's fine. Just don't tell anyone. If I wanted to make that Pokédex, it would take me so long because Pokemon's been going for 30 years. It would take me, oh, is that true? Probably. It would take me so long to get all that information together. It's really important that I use the information that's already there to save me time. Now, that is where it comes into the hackathon. You don't need to have that information because somebody's already done it. Use that in your project because you've only got 3 days, 2.5 days to build something amazing. So don't reinvent the wheel. All right, I'm laboring the point, but it is really important. Oh, here we go. If I wanted to recover a GitHub repo after accidentally deleting, how would I do it? Thanks, Kev, for bringing up bad memory. The answer is you hope that you still have a copy on your computer. All right, that was really fun. I hope you enjoyed that. Obviously, I have contacted most of the people watching. So if you do have questions after the fact, like, oh, I wish I asked that, do reach out. and we'll be able to answer your questions. But yeah, this is how you use an API in a project or a hackathon. So 45 lines of code, and you end up with a project that looks something like this. Let's change the numbers radically, just see what we get. I've got no idea where this is. One thing I'm going to do before I stop, because I think it's that is a terrible picture. I'm going to find out the location of Norwich University Arts, the latitude and longitude 52.63, 1.29. 52.63, 1.29. Yeah. Please have an image. Because this is where we'll be doing hacks. And as you can see, it's the exact image we got when we searched for our location, because it's about 500 meters that way. But that's very cool. I'm going to show you one more thing that is very, very fun. You can do API requests like we just did with JavaScript. You can also do them with Unity. And so this is something Akshat has built, where it's a game that calls an API. It's the same API that I used. So let's have a look at Landsat imagery. Let's find out. But this is using Unity. Now I want you Unity or Unreal developers to have a think. How could you take data that you have? Maybe it's not images, maybe it's a whole bunch of information, and how could you visualize it? It doesn't have to be loading an image. It doesn't have to be making a chart. Can you think of something more fun, more artistic to do with information? Display it in a funky 3D explorable way in a game. Like, you can do that with APIs. You don't have to get the information yourself. I have said that way too many times. And there's also the astronomy picture of the day, which isn't loading, but it does work because look, we've got all this information here, which we read earlier. You've already seen that one. Very cool, Akshat. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, do reach out. But this has been brilliant. Well done, guys. What would happen if you change it to more recent date? That's a good question. I am going to do that. I actually know the answer. If I put it to today, it's going to break. Because there is nothing there. All right. Thank you very much for coming, and I'll see you next week. Next week, we are going to look at a very similar thing. We'll still be using an API, but it will be an API that links to ChatGPT. So how can we take data, give it to ChatGPT, and have it give us some sort of data analysis or some information, again, using an API. All right. Thank you so much. Jez, if you want to end the stream for me.